John Toland, author of Captured by History. Near the end of your book, you say, when I became a communist, I chose to join the American Peace Mobilization. I picketed for peace in front of the White House, and yet, like so many of my comrades in APM, I tried to enlist the day after Pearl Harbor. Later, I opposed the Korean War and publicly decried the Vietnam and Gulf Wars. Explain all that.
Well, I had learned in my life that the worst thing we had to face was war, that nobody won. And I have come to believe that this was the worst century of mankind because of the wars that solved no problems, only developed new ones. And if this continues and we have another war, I think it's the end of the world, because we have got now a gas, for example, that can wipe out other countries in a few days. I don't want that gas. And I have an idea it's already been sold to several countries.
Go back to your statement about being a communist. When were you a communist?
See, I was out of Williams about 4 years, something like that. And I'd been traveling. I spent 4 summers riding freight trains and so forth, and finding America at her best. I just loved riding freight trains and meeting all these wonderful people on the trains. There were no fights there. I'd heard about all the fights they had in the jungles, which were not called jungles by them. Everybody was helping everybody else. And most of them are young men that had left their farms because they wanted their sisters and mothers to have just enough money to eat. And they were out, and I was following them. We were working at a week or so on picking one crop, then to another crop, and I followed them around. And I'll tell you, if you've ever tried to pick lettuce, believe me, that's a tough job. But I found out they helped each other. There was no animosity among them. The only people that they hated were the yard bulls that were in the yards. Now, on the freight trains, the head of the freight train was called a conductor, by the way, and he had about 5 or 6 men. They were friends to these riders. They let them ride. Now there's certain, they have to lock up certain cars. Sometimes you have to ride on top in various places. But they were not brutal like the yard bulls. Once you got off, they'd start hitting you with clubs.
But you had graduated from Williams College.
I was still at Williams when I was riding.
Riding the rails?
Yeah.
But what was it about the Communist Party at that time? What was it like?
Well, when I got into the Communist Party, most of my friends in New York were Jewish. And we were primarily against war. And we thought the communists wanted really peace. We were taken in. And for example, like most people don't realize, is we had to stand in front of an American flag when we were made communists and recite the oath to the United States. We were Americans, and that was it. And then we found out this was a fake, that we had been taken in. But at this time, we fought for peace, and that's why I was chosen as one of the 2 people to go down to Washington to picket the White House, which we had a marvelous time, by the way. And would you like me to go on to what that meeting was like?
Sure.
Well, I was known for my ability to work with anyone, so I traveled with blacks. And we got down there, and I roomed in the same hotel as about 30 blacks were. And on the second, and what we were doing, we were just marching peaceably up and down, occasionally chanting a bit about peace and so forth, but nothing rowdy. But on the second day, we were kicked out of our hotel because there were blacks. And we just didn't know what to do. And we were there. Unfortunately, our leader was from Hollywood, and we had no faith in him. And he was pompousing around. And all of a sudden, I saw, you know where Blair House is? Right next to Blair House is an identical house. Came this woman, stately woman, marching right up the avenue, ignoring the traffic as if she owned the whole place, came over to us and said, "I understand there are certain of you people that were not allowed in your hotels, is that right?" And I told her, yes, there are about 30 of us. And she said, "Are there people, Negroes too?" I said, yes, most of us are Negroes. She said, would you like to stay in my house for the next 2 days? I can only give you blankets to sleep on and so forth, and we will have very slight stuff to eat. And I said, we would accept graciously with you. And then she turned around. I've never seen a more noble woman. And this is a woman, if I'd seen her, I would say she was a reactionary and so forth and so on. Here she was offering her home to 30 blacks and 1 white.
Who was it, did you know?
What?
Who was the woman?
I don't know.
And you stayed there?
We stayed there for the next two nights, and she came down to see us, and we were sleeping on floors and things like that. But she was only there to greet us and not to inspect us.
You left the Communist Party what year?
Oh, I left within 2 years. I left the Communist Party because I saw I'd been had.
Has that followed you through your life in any way? Does it ever pop up where it gives you trouble?
It would have. Do you remember a character called the Ugly American? This man, Ugly American, I forget what his real name is. I had first met him when I was researching in the Philippines, and it's usual. I was set up at Clark Field and so forth, in a barrack there, and then the commanding officer there was quite upset because I had met some local people and getting great material from them, and I was told that we are to be writing about Americans in this war, and I said, sir, I'm writing a book about the war. And they cut off my transportation. I'd take a bus to the Capitol, and the Capitol, they'd usually treated me nicely. They kicked me right out, and I was standing there wondering what to do next, and the man came up. It turned to be the Ugly American, and he said, are you the one that they won't give any transportation? I said, yes. He said, would you like to meet the president of the Philippines tomorrow? I said, I sure would. He brought me to this big hall where the president was talking to the 4 military forces. Afterwards, he introduced me to the president, who asked, what are you here for? And I said, I've come to find out what really happened in the Philippines. And he said, I understand you have trouble. And he pointed to this major who had gone to West Point and said, this man will be your guide. This man found 2 people to take me. I was taken to all the islands. I saw everything I wanted to. For example, when I was in the island that the 2nd president of the Philippines was, I had been there 15 minutes and I got a call to go up and see him. And he has a Chinese name. I forget what his name was. But he said he heard I was there, and he wanted me to reveal something that he had been holding back all these years, that he had been second in command when the president of the Philippines went to America, and he was put in charge. And he was ordered by the president to pretend with 4 other of the top people in the country to work with the Japanese. And this would be to save the public from lots of problems and so forth. But he said he knew he was going to die within a year, and he wanted the truth told so that these people who had never talked would not be regarded as they had been regarded as traitors to their country. And I said, I promised I wouldn't publish this until after his death. He said that. And as I was going out the door, about half a dozen reporters were there, and they yabbering away, and I said, what's the matter? He said, oh, haven't you heard? Some dozen American senators and congressmen had arrived in the Capitol yesterday, and they were telling everybody what was wrong with the country and so forth and so on. And I said, what do you think of that? And I said, well, they might have waited a day. And I left. And I didn't return to Clark Field until 2 days. I had some, and as I walked into the office, everybody stared at me coldly, except I had one friend, this girl, and I went up to her and she said, John, why did you do that? And I said, do what? He said, what you told the Communist Party. And she showed me the Communist newspaper and headlines, American senators, something, something. cause of riots or something. And I said, I didn't say that at all. And he said, do you realize that you're now being sent back to America? The commanding officer there, he's coming up, he's going to tell you, you have now, you won't be able to, I wouldn't be able to write my book. Just as in a movie, who should walk in but the commanding general of all the Air Force in that area of the world, and 4 people. And I had interviewed him in Hawaii before, and he'd given me a couple of great stories. And he looked and he saw me, he says, "Hi, John, how are they treating you over here?" And he said, "Would you like to, we're going on to the next town, Hong Kong. We're on leave. Would you like to go with us?" And I said, "I sure would." When I got into the plane, I told him the real story, and all he did was laugh. And he said, "May I give you some advice, John? Whenever you ask a question by a newspaperman, say, 'No comment.'" But I was always pulled out of these things at the last minute. My career as a writer probably would have ended if he hadn't walked through the door.
How many books have you written in your life that have been published?
I've 14. Two of them were novels. The rest were histories.
And what year in your life did you start writing?
12. I started writing when I was 12. As I say, my father was. I thought everybody was either a painter or a writer. My mother was a painter. My father was a singer, and I was brought up like that. But when I was 12 years old, see, my father was a big Irishman, and he looked at my hands and he says, "My God, you have the hands of a girl." And I said, "Well, who made me?" And he didn't like that. But he loved me, but he saw me as a product of the Scotch part of the family, my mother's part. Now, the Scotch part, they were crazy about me. My mother had 3 sisters. None of them had children. And, of course, I was their idol. And then their father, their grandfather, he was the one that really changed my life. And he told me one thing. He says, "John, you may hear a lot of things about religion, but there's only one thing I want you to do." And I said, "What is that?" He said, "Always do the right thing." And I says, "But Dada, how will I know what is the right thing?" He says, "Usually it's what you don't want to do, but you'll find out." And this has become my religion, and it still is. It's a very simple thing, and it has led me through life. And as I say, I've had a wonderful life. And some people notice that I was a failure until I was 45 years old when I sold my first story. I had written 25 plays, none of them ever put on, but those plays became the reason I wrote a different kind of history, because my great hero was Shakespeare, and he said, "Unto thyself be true." Now, this seemed very simple to me, and if you'll notice, Shakespeare had no point of view when he was writing his stories, and as this Porter Emerson Brown, the great playwright, told me, he said, and the Greeks also. And so I brought into history a non-ideological history, which means no point of view. And that's why a number of people are very unhappy with me, because I treat all people the same. I don't care whether they're colored, I don't care whether they're Irish or Chinese, or I want to hear all sides and just...
Where do you live today?
What, beg pardon?
Where do you live today?
I live in Danbury, Connecticut.
Are you married?
This is my second wife. My first wife I divorced after 10 years. And you'll notice her picture there, a beautiful girl. She's a dancer. Believe me, dancers live by their feet.
Your first wife was a dancer.
But I have two wonderful children from her, 2 daughters. And my second wife and I have a daughter. And I have 3...
Is this your first wife?
That's
right
my
here?
first wife. As I say, she was a beautiful woman and so forth, but I will say nothing about her bad in the book. I only tell how she was the one that, when I brought a black officer into the officers' club at Keeser Field when I was a second lieutenant, I was kicked out of my job, I was threatened, I was almost beaten up and almost killed, she stuck by me. And so, as I say, I will only say good things about her.
And then your second?
My second wife, Toshiko, we married in 1960. I went to Japan. I was doing a book, my first book on the East, hating all Japanese. In one day I found out I was beginning to like the Japanese. On the third day there, I met Toshiko. I needed an interpreter. And when I saw her, I knew I was going to marry her. But first I had to tell her it was a rough life, you know, that we'd live, and that I was on the road about 8 months of the year. And then I think I'd been there. She became my interpreter in the evenings. And on the 9th day I knew her, I said, "Would you marry me?" And she instantly said yes. And her father, who was a very noted man there, he spoke English with an Oxford accent, and he was a top samurai type, and he has been trying to marry her for 11 years, and she's turning down everybody. And he and his wife were horrified to learn she was marrying an American writer, and writer's the lowest form of life in Japan. And they couldn't see me for a long time. Finally, 2 days before our marriage, they finally agreed to see me, and he was asking me. He spoke this marvelous language. He's a rather big man for a Japanese, and he says, "You've got a divorce," and we went through all that. And after about 5 questions, the wife, who was very small, she looked like a little Buddha, and she said, "John, you will make Toshiko very happy." And then we breathed a sigh of relief. I gave him a dozen American golf balls, which are bigger than the others, and he became my greatest assistant. I could not have written The Rising Sun without him. He got me to the Markets Kido, who was the emperor's chief advisor. He knew everybody in Japan, and people that refused to talk to me before and to talk to any American came right in. I was allowed, I even had arranged a meeting with the emperor himself, and then at that point, you may have remembered that an Englishman wrote a book about the emperor just beating him to hell. He had come over for a week and then described it. And so the embassy called me and said, "I'm sorry, you cannot meet His Majesty." And they said, "What, can we do anything else to help you?" And I said, "Yes, you can. I will forget this if you will allow me to interview the 6 gentlemen that served the emperor." These were people of high class, worked around. I got more about the emperor from these 6 men, all with these wonderful stories, personal stories of his quirks and queries. I've got about 3 pages of it in the Rising Sun. So I had always found out, never go down defeated. There are sometimes you must retreat, but try to make a deal where you can get something out of it.
Which one of your 12 nonfiction books sold the most?
Adolf Hitler. That became a big bestseller. It's still a bestseller. Guess who just bought it? Now the Chinese just bought it. Now it's been published in 25 countries, and this was a book that was turned down by my publishers of the Rising Sun, who didn't particularly like the book.
This is 1976, Adolf Hitler?
Yeah, and that's still a big bestseller. It's made a fortune, and the publishers of The Rising Sun did not like it because I was making heroes, they said, of the Japanese. And they had complained. They published my book, The Last 100 Days, which was quite a good bestseller. And I had retreated a little because they objected to the way I made some Germans heroes and so forth. But when I wrote The Rising Sun, I saw that I had the truth because my wife and her whole family had brought me in. And now I felt I knew the whole truth, and that I could not change a single thing. I had to go to New York something like 90 times, and they kept yapping at me, and I refused. Well, I went off now, starting research on Adolf Hitler, and passed them the contract on, they turned it down. They said, you have taken too much time of the editors, therefore you must go down from 12% on the book to 8%. And I'm half Irish, and you know what I told them, don't you?
So Adolf Hitler is the bestseller.
Oh, yeah.
In time, since 76, how many copies has it sold?
A million.
1 million copies?
More than, I don't know how many copies. All I know is that it's made $2 million. They lost $2 million.
For you?
I
mean that 2 million came to you?
Yeah. I made, the first year I made $1 million, and it kept, I don't know all of the, I don't think about money, really. I can't figure what it is. All I know is it made a hell of a lot of money.
Well, let me ask you this. Have you ever totaled up of all the books you've sold, how many books you've sold?
Oh, God, no. Once I finish a book, I'm not like most authors. When the first book I finished, I immediately went to the Library of Congress, and I turned over all my material, my interviews and so forth, and all the things I'd found out, because I wanted this to be open for other people. Now, this doesn't seem to make sense to some people. Now, then when my books got better, they said they couldn't handle all the people that were coming in. And I had been working with the National Archives. They had always believed in me. The people down there were marvelous to me. And they heard about the fact that I was giving books away. And they said, we'd like you to send all your material now to the FDR library, Presidential Library. And I said, the Presidential Library, I thought he was a bum, that has nothing to do with it. He said, do you know we run those ourselves? I didn't know that the National Archives. They send down the people who run it, and it's just known as that library. Since then, I have sent all my tapes of whenever I finish a book, and there was a time when I was offered money, and some of my family said, why don't you take it? And I said, how can I take it? I didn't think it was... See, I had been helped by so many people, and I think good writers want other people to follow them, because no matter how good my books are, I think new information should come up, and we want to keep the thing going.
Are all of your tapes at the FDR library?
Not all of them. I gave all of them I also made copies of all of them and sent them to the Library of Congress, because some of my people still thought I was. So I wanted the Library of Congress. So, now they are told there are certain people. I say that you cannot use these, and I've promised they cannot be used until the man is dead. See, but outside of that, they're open to everybody, and I don't care what nationality.
Did you say you think that FDR was a bum?
I think he was worse than that.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
Oh, well, I got to know his wife. She's a wonderful person, and she saved my life, and I admire her greatly. Now, her own family treated her miserably, but he treated her. He had 3 mistresses at a time and things like this, and I heard stories from around that. See, at first he was my great hero. I thought he was a great hero. You
first saw him when?
When I was at college, we used to come down through from Williamstown down through in his town,
Williamstown, Massachusetts.
Yeah, and so we used to come down that road which goes right through his town. And of course, I had seen him when he first ran for president, and I was then a freshman at Williams College, and he was driving through with the president of New York, with the governor of New York, and the governor of Massachusetts. They were both Williams men, and they stopped there to talk. And the Williams students around there were 95% wealthy, and they were booing the president, and well, at any rate, I was called out. I was naturally not in any fraternity. I was at the Commons Club, where already I had changed their whole way of carrying trade. I've gone to Exeter, where we had to carry we had 2 tables of 8, Here we had only one table, and they were carrying the trays like
You were
this.
a waiter.
I was a waiter. See, I was offered when I went to Exeter, I graduated, and I was offered, because of my grades, I was offered free, 4 years free at Yale, Harvard, Dartmouth, and so forth. And our president of Exeter called me, and he never spoken to me in my 2 years there. See, after graduating from Norwalk High School, I realized that I could never make it at college unless I went to a place like Phillips Exeter Academy to learn how to really study. And so I loved my 2 years there, and when I graduated, as I had offers from 4 of these places, and our president called me in and told him, he said, I hear you have all these offers. I'd like you to make one for my college. It's a little college called Williams College. And he said, you're going to love it because it's a rich man's college, and you'll be the poorest boy that ever went there. He said, I don't know how you did it, but I know you made more money here at Exeter than anyone ever made. I had 3 jobs, and I was selling things. I know how to make money. And so I said, fine, I accept. And I went there, and he said, they also have a wonderful system, better than they have at Harvard. I know you want to be a writer. Do you know that when you become a junior, if you're getting very high marks, you can have what we call honors work. You can work with any professor you want in the school yourself. You're the only one in the class. Now, if you really get high grades, you have double honors work. So I knew I went there. I knew I had to make money because after I was going to Williams, to college, I had heard that this famous George Pierce Baker, remember, he started at Harvard, and he trained some of the best playwrights in the country. And then he had been lured down to open up the Yale Drama School, and he was running this thing. It was a 3-year course, and they wouldn't have any. I'd have to pay. It would cost me something like $20,000. So I had to not only make all my stuff, but I had to make $20,000 in the meantime so I could go there. And he said, knowing you, you're going to make it. And I accepted on the spot. It was true. As I say, when I first went down there, they sent me over to I had a job working at the Commons Club, and I couldn't stand seeing people riding through. And when they'd go out in the kitchen, they'd have to bump ass their way through the door. And I said, why don't you learn how? And that's where I got my nickname of Shifty. I could shift around. And unfortunately, I was a hated man among the fraternities because they heard all these stories about me and so forth and so on. Not only that, but see, there are about 20. I had to have about 20 extra waiters, which worked in the fraternities during the seasons. And what happened is that they suddenly cut the fees in half. And these 20 men came to me and said, "What do we do?" And I said, "We strike." And I told them to just cut it out. Well, we beat them to it, and then they came. I said, "But you must all stick together," and they all agreed to stick together. And then so the fraternity said, "All right, you can have the same." And I says, "No, we want half more." So, well, I made the damn fraternities pay, and they never forgave me for it.
Let me go back to FDR. You said that FDR was a bum.
Maybe bum's not the word. Unsavory.
Unsavory. Well, let me ask you about the book Infamy.
Infamy, yes.
When did you write Infamy, and why did you get such criticism?
Well, in the first place, I made a terrible mistake when I wrote the Rising Sun. I stated everybody said Roosevelt did not know that the Japanese task force was coming, and within
at Pearl Harbor.
At Pearl Harbor. Well, within a year, I began to get letters from top people in the U.S. Navy saying, "That's nonsense. We knew." Well, I went on for about 10 years with this and getting more and more. And like the relatives of those those people head of the Navy that their lives were ruined by all this. I forget the names of them, but that whole family.
Sullivans?
No,
5 Sullivan boys?
no, not them. It was this other, it was a higher class family, and the whole family has been ruined by this, and they became my best friends. And so, as I say, I told Toshiko, who's very smart, I said, I've got to write this because I've made a terrible mistake. She said, John, if you do, it's the biggest mistake you've ever made. They're going to kill you at it. And she was right. They just, I found out the facts, not only from these people in the U.S. Navy, but, for example, the man in the Dutchman, whom I had heard a Dutchman was
Dutch admiral?
He was not an admiral
at the time, but he went on to be an admiral.
He became an admiral finally. But I heard about him, but nobody knew where he was, and I advertised around. Then I got a letter. It was from the admiral. He was living in Texas at the time. I was down there the next day.
Retired in Texas.
He was retired. He had me at his hotel, and he was not. He had to be helped around. He was. He was not senile. He was just had a hard time getting around, and his son was always with us. Also, I had him taped. I was called a liar. I was, for example, this guy that got killed in an airplane crash recently. His main theme in life was to try to ruin me, and he claimed that I lied about all these things and so forth and so on. I just don't understand these people that come up with these things trying to ruin you.
But you said, though, in infamy, that FDR knew about the Pearl Harbor thing in advance.
And then I told my wife I had to delve into this. I delved not only into these top families, the naval families that knew all this, but I got this Dutchman told me the inside story. He was the one that secretly brought the Bofors anti-aircraft gun to the U.S. Navy. See, he was I don't know what you call it. They don't fight. They just work in various cities. They're not fighters as much as planners. And he was the planner down in Washington, and therefore
planners for the Dutch.
Yeah, and see, he had friend in the American Navy, and he heard that we needed the Bofors guns. See? So they came to him, and he secretly got the he knew where there were the plates and everything that you could design the gun for. He got it through his own planes, and of course this raised hell with this is the reason that we were not defeated afterwards at in the great battle out there. And this man told me the inside story, and they knew all about the fact that Roosevelt knew that the Japanese.
Why would a Dutch military man know the inside story?
Because he was working with. He was the one that brought that to the U.S. Navy. See, and so he was. They regarded him as their best friend. We later made him an honorary
citizen,
admiral or whatever it is they give this. He later got the highest award you can give to a foreigner. Go
back to the one of the themes in your book are that every time you would write a new book, the Book of the Month Club would pick the book, but then the judges would overrule them. How often did that happen, and why did they overrule them? How'd that work?
Well, this happened, I think, 5 times. They didn't like me personally.
Why?
Because I was writing things that they didn't write. You know, I'm very outspoken, and I say exactly what I think and so forth. And I'd say I have facts behind me too, and this irritates them. But for some reason, they dislike me. I could not understand this, but I was turned down 5 times by them.
But how did that work? Who would select it, and then who would turn you down?
Well, see, they would select so many people, and then they would vote on it. But that's why I never got Book of the Month Club. I was always one. But as soon as they'd dump me, some other book club would pick it up, you know. So,
But if you sold 1 million copies of the Adolf Hitler book,
yeah.
were there any other books that sold lots like that?
Well, I know the last 100 Days sold a lot of books.
How many?
Gee, I don't know. I never.
Hundreds of thousands, or you know? Has this all made you a wealthy man?
Yeah. But you see, what people didn't realize, like I made a lot of money on the last 100 Days, but then my next book was going to be on the Japanese war, and I needed money. And so I spent all the money I made on that to, see, I don't work like other people. I spend about 2 years researching, going all over the world, and you know, it costs money to go around the world. And then the last 100 days, the book on Japan, you know.
Infamy?
No, you know, I have a
Rising Sun?
The Rising Sun, yeah. The Rising Sun won all the prizes, but I spent all the money I made on The Rising Sun to do this. I had this terrific idea about Hitler. I had by this time got to know all the intimate groups within Germany that would talk to me, but it, you know, it cost a lot of money, and I had also saved $100,000, and many of my friends in Washington had been making money through a man that was investing for them, and they said, please put your money there. I put $100,000 in. 3 months later, I got a report. You know how much of my $100,000 was left? Zero. So I had some very wealthy friends in the town, and they sent me to their lawyers, who these lawyers only work with the richest people in the world. And you know, this famous place refused to take a cent for me for the next 5 years, handling me, and I was getting help. And they finally, this young man got this loan for me, which he never wanted repaid, which I did. But they finally, we got enough money so I could start and go back into work. And I threw all that money into, this is my big book on Hitler. And by the time I finished it, you see, I didn't have any money. But when Hitler came out, it came out with a bang. And within a month, you know, I had everything back. And from then on, I've had, as I say, I made a lot of money on these other books, but I would throw it all in on the next book to come, see. But at the same time, you see, I was also helping, I have children, I was helping them build their houses and so forth and so on. So when it came down to how much I had was zero.
Let's recap, though. Born in La Crosse, Wisconsin,
yeah.
live now in Danbury, Connecticut.
Yeah.
Went to Exeter.
Exeter.
Where's that located?
In Exeter, New Hampshire.
Williams College, graduate in 1932.
Uh-huh.
Spent time in the Army for how long?
I was 3.5 years during the war, and that was a time I had. Originally I wanted to be a glider pilot because I was too old to be a pilot. So I went down there, and I was accepted by the gliders, and I was in Texas for about 5 months, and then all of a sudden came the report that the first report of what happened in Asia, something like 90% of them sent over were killed. There's no place to land there. And so there were about 30 of us there, and we all said, we're not taking any more glider pilots. So I said, the hell with it, and I went to Fargo, North Dakota, to become an officer. And I became an officer there.
But you didn't serve overseas during the military?
No, and this, I felt guilty that I has never been over there, and that's one reason I write my books.
Dorothy, your first wife, you married in what year?
That must have been
1943, I believe.
I believe it was 43, yes.
And you had 2 daughters.
2 daughters.
Are they still alive?
They're still alive, and they've. The oldest daughter has a son and a daughter, and the youngest daughter has a daughter.
And you married Tosco in 1960?
1960.
Had a daughter by her in 1968?
Yes, right.
And her name?
Is Tamiko.
And where does she live?
She lives in New York, and I'd like to explain that Tamiko in Japanese means daughter of God. And she is a very self-made person, and she knew that I love Russian literature, and I have many friends in Russia and so forth. And you know, she went to a school, she learned Russian, she got to speak it fluently. When she went to a university that majored in it, Cornell, she spent a whole semester in Russia and so forth and so on. And then my friends in Russia, when she was out, she was going to go there, they told me, please get her out because they were having problems there. So she never did work in there. And she's now in what the devil is this? They make this stuff around New York State. You know, I can't think of what it was they make.
Well, let me go on.
Anyway, she's in this business now, which rather. Her mother was shocked to hear she was working in this kind of work, but what I did, I went up to meet her boss and so forth, and I found out she was doing well and so forth, but I warned her, I said, he's a cheapskate, and he still is. But she's on her own now and doing very well, I think.
You won your Pulitzer when you were 59 years old.
I guess so.
And you're now how old?
I'm 85.
Will you write another book?
No.
Why not?
I have nothing more to say. I think this book, you see, I'm working with a dozen younger writers that I was helped by older writers. What most people don't realize is that in our business, if you're really good, you want somebody following you. And I have many famous people reading my plays and so forth, and trying to get me to, I almost sold 2 of my plays, but that didn't work. But I realized in the 25 plays I'd written, I'd learned something about the play has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and this is something that history doesn't have. I brought to history my knowledge of what should be life, and also that you should have no point of view. See, Shakespeare told me that. He said, unto thyself be true. And so I actually believed what Shakespeare told me. And then when I was only about 12 years old, this drunken playwright came to live with us. And he taught me playwriting. And he'd been a famous playwright, and he'd written, his most famous play was called The Bad Man.
Porter Emerson Brown?
Porter Emerson Brown.
Who you say is kind of your mentor, hero?
He was my hero. And see, he was a little guy, and he just adored my father, who was a big, handsome man. And when his wife died, he took to liquor. And my father saw him drunk downtown and brought him home. And he says, I'm going to dry him out. It took almost 3 years, but he did. And during that time, Porter became my best friend. And I heard all about this wonderful play. His most famous play was called The Bad Man, in which this was about Pancho Villa. But as he told me, he said, the bad man actually, in the play, turns out to be a good man. And he said, if that were straight, it never would have been successful. As a comedy, this was the biggest hit on Broadway in 3 years. And then I said, well, why did you write about Pancho Villa? He says, I rode with him for 3 years. He says, maybe you say he was a terrible person. He says, maybe he was a terrible American, but he certainly was a good Mexican. And he said, I rode with him, and he was an honorable man. And he said, that's why the play was good.
One of the things I noticed in your book is that you often write how the Washington Post was.
Oh, they hate me. I bet they gave me a lousy review.
Have you seen the review they gave yesterday?
No. I understand it's usual. That guy's been after me for years.
The guy that wrote it, and I'll have to get his name here, is the guy that's also written a book on Hitler. His name is Clay Blair.
Clay Blair, Jesus.
Second volume of Hitler's U-Boat War will be published next spring. Here's what he said about your book. He said, Toland's autobiography is a candid but pedestrian recounting of his long struggle to reach the top. Odd job by odd job, wife by wife, agent by agent, publisher by publisher, editor by editor, book by book, including several failures. It teems with lunches, trips, dates, interviews, and summaries of his books. Toland and his editors, collaborators produced some fine and some not so fine popular military history, but regrettably he is apparently unable to summon up the drama of his own life.
Well, I expected it.
Why?
Because they hate my guts.
Why?
Well, you see, I used to review for the Washington Post. And when my book Infamy came out, the two girls that ran it called me up and said, John, they've taken your book away from us. It's being reviewed by the editorial department. Now, since when does the editorial department, and they gave it a terrible review. Of course, said it was the end of my life as a, you couldn't have written a rottener one, but I expected it from them. And did you read the Washington Times review?
I haven't seen it. When was it in yesterday?
Terrific. Of course.
But why would they, in your opinion, why would they give you a terrific review over the Washington
Because
Post?
they liked it. I review for them too, by the way. But, you see, I don't take the Washington Post seriously. I knew they'd say something like that, or worse. I thought it'd be worse than that.
Where do you end up today politically?
Politically, I work up with myself. You know, I'm supposedly a Republican, but I've always voted, the last times I've ever voted, I voted Democratic because it was a little better.
How long ago was that?
I don't know, maybe 4 years ago. But, and you see, I've worked so long in Washington that I've realized this is one of the worst cities in the United States. So much crookedness going on there, and I've tried to reveal some of this thing they won't publish. For example, I wrote a whole series on the fact of we run our government on a false basis, which is called the rider basis. You know what a rider is. You go to somebody and say, look, I will vote for this bill if you will do something this. That's a rider. Now, some of these things have 10 pages of riders on it, has nothing to do with the poor thing you're trying to bring into organization. That's a hell of a way to run a country. And there are some honest people down there, yes, but they're having a tough time. And look at our presidents. You know, the one president I liked was Truman. And when I first went out to meet him, we started by hating each other's guts because I had just discovered from the U.S. Navy and other people that there was no need to drop the atomic bomb. The so-called fear of this huge amount of the greatest fighting force had been in China, and they were supposed to go to back to Japan and raise hell for us. The U.S. Navy informed me this is not true. We sank them. They all were sent, not there, they had been sent to the Philippines, and we sank 3/4 of their ships. I got this from the U.S. Navy. And so I just let things out like that, and then it starts, and eventually the truth comes out that there was no need to drop that bomb.
One of your techniques you write about in here is that every time you interviewed someone, and you were going to quote them, you allowed them to see the quote in advance.
Yes.
And correct it?
They can delete it and correct it.
And you never worried about them taking a story out that you wanted to tell just because they didn't like the way it came out?
No, I don't care. If they didn't... Look, I gave my word, and I never broke it. And you see, when I went over... This started in Germany, and I started meeting people that knew Hitler, and I found a new Hitler and so forth, and I found out all these things. For example, I found Ava Brown's best friend. And a friend of mine had written a book about this woman. I forget what her name is.
Schneider?
Schneider, yes. And,
Herta Schneider?
yeah, Herta. That's exactly it. How do you know that?
I read your book.
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, I've forgotten that. But what happened was, so I wrote to Schneider, and she, being polite, says, yes, she'll come up to see me. But she was planning to tell me to go to hell. Now, I got into my German car, and I started out, it was early winter, cold as hell, and the windshield, it was starting to snow and rain at the same time, and the windshield wiper stopped. I had to, this was a trip that would take about 45 minutes. It took me 3 hours. I had to get out of the car about 50 times to wipe it off. When I got to the door, I was soaking wet. Her husband came, and a very fine man, by the way. He looked at me, and I was just soaking. He says, better come in quickly. And then he brought his wife out, and she was stern, and then she saw me. And then she became motherly. And I was treated like the boy, and they got me clean clothes. They made me wear their clothes and so forth and so on. And then he said to me, get her to show you the pictures. And I didn't know what he meant. And I said, your husband mentioned something about pictures. Oh, you mean the pictures I have of Ava Brown and so forth? And said, would you like those? I said, I certainly would. If you've read seen my book on Hitler, you'll see a number of the pictures there that had never been seen before. That she just gave me all these pictures, these marvelous pictures. One I particularly like. I don't know if I published it or not. Anyway, it's a beautiful picture of Ava. She's naked, but you don't see anything. It's a very artistic picture. And she let me have that. And I had all these pictures and so forth, and I didn't do a thing. And I believed that somebody's helping me. It must be. So many things have happened to me. Like, you remember, I tell about, I had to go to Exeter, and so I had to make money, so I worked in the Norwalk Tire and Rubber Company as the boy running around, and I was thinking of my stories, and I fell down an elevator shaft because the guy had forgotten to pull the fence. And all I remember is, boy, I was stunned. And then I heard this grinding noise, and I looked up, and it's coming down. I am notoriously slow. I am notoriously, look at my hands. The young man that had coming down, when he was shocked. He saw me standing in this one place I could have leaped into. In my ordinary days, I couldn't have climbed into there. I don't know how I got there. What did it? But this has happened to me. I've had about 5 or 6 classes. I walked into Lake Okoboji when I was 2 years old and went over my head. And my uncle had to jump down from his room and pull me out. I was always climbing out on roofs when I was a baby, and and once when I was a year old, I was in my diaper, and I had gotten my father's hat, which came over my nose, and I was walking up the railroad, the trolley tracks, and my mother said that this trolley almost ran me down. The conductor came out and went up to my wife and says, Mrs. Tolan, does this belong to you? But somebody was always saving me.
What are you going to do now that you've decided not to write anymore?
I want to help my children, naturally. I just, have you ever been to Block Island? It's a wonderful place because there automobiles come in last.
Where is it?
Huh?
Where is it?
Block Island is off Providence. It takes about 90 minutes to go by a ferry boat over there. And it's not a big place, but I tell you, it's a wonderful place. While I was over there, I met about 6 people I've known for years, just out of the blue, meeting these people. But I liked it because everybody is polite. And like in cars, if they have one policeman, I think, in the whole place or something like that, and he drives slowly. But the first people think of are the pedestrians, and then the bicyclists and so forth, and then cars come in last. And I've noticed with cars, when you come up to a four-way place, to be about 4 cars, every car is waiting for the next one politely. You've never seen, and there's no signs. They have stop signs, and that's about all, but no traffic lights or anything. Nobody was hurt and so forth. And I just like the whole idea of people thinking of other people. And that's why I think, and then now they say, oh, John, you know, there are a lot of millionaires on there, and they're making a lot. I don't care who's doing it. Whatever it is, I recommend it highly for people that want to spend a quiet holiday.
How well do you think this will sell, and how many books did they print, first printing?
I have no idea. I'm getting a lot of letters from people that, so many people write me about it, and I hope it sells well.
Our guest has been John Toland, and the book is called Captured by History. We thank you very much for joining us.